guys, we're back. So we're at 3.9. He's just gonna leave the airport, and he's gonna try to make contact with the guy. So, okay. So Eddie tucked his declaration card and passport in his breast pocket. The steel wire was now turning steadily around his guts, sinking in deeper and deeper, making his nerves spark and sizzle. And suddenly a voice spoke in his head. Not a thought, a voice. Listen to me, fellow. Listen carefully, and if you would remain safe, let your face show nothing which might further rouse the suspicion of those army women. God knows your suspicion is enough already. Eddie first thought he was still wearing the airline earphones and picking up some weird transmission from the cockpit, but the airline headphones had been picked up 5 minutes ago. His second thought was that someone was standing beside him and talking. He almost snapped his head to the left, but that was absurd. Like it or not, the raw truth was that the voice had come from inside his head. Maybe he was receiving some sort of transmission, AM, FM, or VHF, on the fillings of his teeth. He had heard of such a thing. Straighten up, maggot. They're suspicious enough without you looking as if you're gone crazy. And he sat up fast, as if he had been whacked. That voice wasn't Henry's, but it was so much like Henry's that they had been just a couple of kids growing up in the projects. Henry, 8 years older, sister who had been between them now only a ghost of memory, Selena, had been struck and killed by a car when Eddie was 2 and Henry 10. That rasping tone of command came out of whenever Henry saw him doing something that might end with Eddie occupying a pine box long before his time, as Selena had. What in the blue flock is going on here? You're not hearing voices that aren't there, the voice inside his head returned. No, not Henry's voice, older, drier, stronger, but like Henry's voice and impossible not to believe. That's the first thing. You're not going crazy. I am another person. This is telepathy? And he was vaguely aware that his face was completely expressionless. Thought that under the circumstances that ought to qualify him for the Best Actor of the Year Academy Award. He looked out the window and saw the plane closing in on the Delta section of Kennedy's International Arrival Building. I don't know that word, but I do know that those army women know you are carrying. There was a pause, a feeling odder beyond telling, of phantom fingers rummaging through his brain as if they were living card catalog. Heroin or cocaine, I can't tell which, except it must be cocaine, because carrying all the ones you don't take, because you're carrying the one you don't take to buy the one you do. What army woman? Eddie muttered in a low voice. He was completely unaware that he was speaking aloud. What in the hell are you talking about? That feeling of being slapped once more, so real he felt his head ring with it. Shut your mouth, you damn jackass. All right, Christ. Now the feeling of rummaging fingers again. Army stewardesses, the alien voice replied. Do you understand me? I have no time to con your every thought, prisoner. What did you? Eddie began, then shut his mouth. What did you call me? Never mind. Just listen. Time is very short. They know the army stewardesses know you have this cocaine. How could they? That's ridiculous. I don't know how they came by their knowledge, and it doesn't matter. One of them told the drivers. The drivers will tell whatever priests performed the ceremony, this clearing of customs. The language of the voice in his head was arcane, the terms so off-kilter they were almost cute, but the message came through loud and clear. Although his face remained expressionless, Eddie's teeth came together with a painful click, and he drew a hot little hiss in through them. The voice was saying the game was over. He hadn't even gone off the plane, and the game was already over. This this wasn't real. No way could this be real. It was just his mind doing paranoid little jig at the last minute, that was all. He would ignore it. Just ignore it, and it would go away. You will not ignore it, or you will go to jail, and I will die, the voice roared. Who in the name of God are you? Eddie asked reluctantly, fearfully. Inside his head, he heard someone or something let out a deep, gusty sigh of relief. He believes, the gunslinger thought. Thank all the gods that are or ever were. He believes. The plane stopped, fastened seatbelt, lights went out. Jetway rolled forward and bumped against the forward port door with a gentle bump. They had arrived. There's a place where you can put it while you perform the clearing of customs, a voice said. A safe place. Then, when you are away, you can get it again and take it to this man Balazar. People were standing up now, getting things out of the overhead bins and trying to deal with coats which were, according to the cockpit announcement, too warm to wear. Get your bag, get your jacket, then go into the privy again. Bathroom. Oh, bathroom. Head. If they think I've got dope, they'll think I'm trying to dump it. But Eddie understood that part didn't matter. They wouldn't exactly break down the door because that might scare the passengers, and they know you couldn't flush 2 pounds of coke down an airline toilet and leave no trace. Not unless the voice was really telling the truth. There was some safe place, but how could there be? Never mind, damn you, move. Eddie moved because he had finally come alive to the situation. He was not seeing all Roland with his many years and his training of mingled torture and precision. What? Because he had finally come alive. He was not seeing all Roland with his many years and training in mingled torture and precision could see, but he could see the faces of the stews, the real faces, the ones behind the smiles and the helpful passing of garment bags and cartons stowed in the forward closet. He could see the way their eyes flicked to him, whiplash quick again and again. He got his bag, got his jacket, the door to the jetway had been opened, and people were already moving up the aisle. The door to the cockpit was open, and here was the captain, also smiling, also looking at the passengers in the first class, who were still getting things together, spotting him, no, targeting him, then looking away, nodding to someone, tousling a youngster's head. He was cold now, not cold turkey, but just cold. You didn't need the voice in his head to make him cold. Cold sometimes, that was okay. You just had to be careful you didn't get so cold you froze. And he moved forward, reached the point where a left turn would take him into the jetway, then suddenly put his hand to his mouth. I don't feel well, he murmured. Excuse me. He moved the door to the cockpit, which slightly blocked the door to the first class head, opened the bathroom door to the right. I'm afraid you'll have to exit the plane, the pilot said sharply as Eddie opened the bathroom door. I believe I'm going to vomit. I don't want to do it on your shoes, Eddie said, or mine either. A second later, he was in with the door locked. The captain was saying something. Eddie couldn't make it out and didn't want to make it out. The important thing was it was just talk, not yelling. He had been right. No one was going to start yelling with maybe 250 passengers still waiting to deplane from the single forward door. He was in, he was temporarily safe, but what good was it going to do him? If you're there, he thought, you better do something very quick, whoever you are. For a terrible moment, there was nothing at all. There was a short moment, but in Eddie's Dean's head, it seemed to stretch on out almost forever. Like Bonomo's Turkish taffy, Henry had sometimes bought him in the summer when they were kids. If he were bad, Henry beat the shit out of him. If he were good, Henry bought him Turkish taffy. That was the way Henry handled his heightened responsibilities during summer vacation. God, oh Christ, I imagined it all. Oh Jesus, how crazy could I have been? Get ready, a grim voice said. I can't do it alone. I can come forward, but I can't make you come through. You have to do it with me. Turn around. Eddie was suddenly seeing through two pairs of eyes, feeling with two sets of nerves. But not all the nerves of this other person were here. Parts of the other were gone, freshly gone, screaming with pain, sensing with 10 senses, thinking with 2 brains, his blood beating with 2 hearts. He turned around. There was a hole in the side of the bathroom, a hole that looked like a doorway. Through it, he could see a grainy beach and waves color of old athletic socks breaking upon it. He could hear the waves. He could smell the salt, smell the bitter a smell as bitter as tears in their nose. Go through. Someone was thumping on the door to the bathroom, telling him to come out, that he must deplane at once. Go through, damn you. Eddie, moaning, stepped towards the door, stumbled, fell into the other world. He got slowly to his feet, aware that he had cut his right palm on an edge of shell. He looked stupidly at the blood welling across his lifeline, then saw another man rising slowly to his feet on his right. Eddie recoiled, his feelings of disorientation and dreamy dislocation suddenly supplanted by a sharp terror. This man was dead and didn't know it. His face was gaunt, skin stretched over the bones of his face like strips of cloth, wound around slim angles of metal, almost to the point where the cloth must tear itself open. The man's skin was livid, save for hectic spots of red high on each cheekbone, on the neck below the angle of the jaw on either side, and a single circular mark between the eyes, like a child's effort to replicate a Hindu caste symbol. Yet his eyes, blue, steady, sane, were alive and full of terrible, tenacious vitality. He tore dark cloths of some homespun material. The shirt, its sleeves rolled up, was a black faded almost to gray. Pants, something that looked like blue jeans. Gun belts crisscrossed his hips, but the loops were almost all empty. The holsters held guns that looked like 45s, but 45s of an incredibly antique vintage. Smooth wood of their hand grips seemed to glow with their own inner light. Eddie, who didn't know he had any intention of speaking, anything to say, heard himself saying something nevertheless. Are you a ghost? Not yet, the man with the guns croaked. The devil weed, cocaine, whatever you call it. Take off your shirt. Your arms. Eddie had seen them. Arms of the man looked like an extravagant sort of gunslinger one would only see in a spaghetti western, where glowing with lines of bright, baleful red. Eddie knew well enough that lines like that meant they meant blood poisoning. They meant the devil was going more than breathing up your ass. Was already crawling up the sewers that led to your pumps. Never mind my fucking arms, the pallid apparition told him. Take off your shirt and get rid of it. He heard waves. He heard the lonely hoot of a wind that knew no obstruction. He saw this mad dying man and nothing else but desolation. Yet from behind him he heard the murmuring voices of deplaning passengers and steady muffled pounding. Mr. Dean, that voice, he thought, is in another world, not really doubting it, just trying to pound it through his head, the way you'd pound a nail through a thick piece of mahogany. You'll really have to. You can leave it, pick it up later, the gunslinger croaked. Gods, don't you understand? I have to talk here. It hurts. There is no time, you idiot. There were men Eddie would have killed for using such a word. There were men Eddie would have killed for using such a word. but he had an idea that might have a job killing. But he had an idea that might have a job killing this man, even though the man looked like killing might do him good. Yet he sensed the truth in those blue eyes. All questions were cancelled in their mad glare. Eddie began to unbutton his shirt. His first impulse was to simply tear it off like Clark Kent, while Lois Lane was tied to a railroad track or something. But that was no good in real life. Sooner or later he had to explain those missing buttons. So he slipped them through the loops while the pounding behind him went on. He yanked the shirt out of his jeans, pulled it off, and dropped it, revealing the strapping tape across his chest. Looked like a man in the last stages of recovery from badly fractured ribs. He snapped at a glance behind him and saw an open door. Its bottom jamb had dragged a fan shape in the gray grit of the beach when someone, the dying man, presumably had opened it. Through the door he saw the first-class head, the basin, the mirror, and in it his own desperate face, black hair spilled across his brow and over his hazel eyes. In the background, he saw the gunslinger, the beach, and soaring seabirds that screeched and squabbled over God knew what. He pawed at the tape, wondering how to start, how to find the loose end, and dazed sort of hopelessness settled over him. This was the way a deer or rabbit must feel when it got halfway across a country road and then turned its head only to be fixated by that oncoming glare of headlights. It had taken William Wilson, the man whose name Poe had made famous, 20 minutes to strap him up. They would have the door to the first-class bathroom open in 5, 7 at most. I can't get this shit off, he told the swaying man in front of him. I don't know who you are or where I am, but I'm telling you there's too much tape and too little time. Dear, the co-pilot suggested Captain McDonald ought to lay off pounding on the door when McDonald, in his frustration at the 3A's lack of response, began to do so. Where's he going to go? Dear asked. What's he going to do? Flush himself down to John? He's too big. But if he's carrying, McDonald began. Dear, who had himself used cocaine on more than a few occasions, said if he's carrying heavy. He can't get rid of it. Turn off the water, McDonald snapped suddenly. Already have, the navigator, who had also tooted more than his flute on occasion, said, but I don't think it matters. You can dissolve what goes into the holding tanks, but you can't make it not there. They were clustered around the bathroom door, with its occupied sign glowing jeerily at them. Glowing jeerily, all of them speaking in low tones. The DEA guys draw off a sample, and the guys hung. He could always say someone came in before him and dumped it, McDonald replied. His voice was gaining a raw edge. He didn't want to be talking about this. He wanted to be doing something about it. Even though he was acutely aware that the geese were still filing out, many looking with more than ordinary curiosity at the flight deck crew and stewardesses gathered around the bathroom door. For their part, the crew were acutely aware that an act that was well overly overt could provoke the terrorist boogeyman that now lurked in the back of every air traveler's mind. McDonald knew his navigator and flight engineer were right. He knew that the stuff was apt to be in plastic bags with Scoosball's prints on them, and yet he felt alarm bells going off in his mind. Something was not right about this. Something inside of him kept screaming, fast one, as if the fellow from 3A were a riverboat gambler with palmed aces. He was all ready to play. He's not trying to flush the John, Susie Douglas said. He's not even trying to run the basin faucets. We'd hear them sucking air if he was. I hear something, but... Leave, McDonald said curtly. His eyes flickered to Jane Dorning. You two, we'll take care of this. Jane turned to go, cheeks burning. Susie said quietly, Jane bird-dogged him, and I spotted the bulges under his shirt. I think we'll stay, Captain McDonald. If you want to bring charges of insubordination, you can, but I want you to remember that you may be raping the hell out of what could be really big DEA bust. Her eyes looked, flint sparking of steel. Susie said, I've flown with you 70, 80 times, Mac. I'm trying to be your friend. McDonald looked at her a moment longer, then nodded. Stay then. I want both of you back a step toward the cockpit. He stood on his toes, looked back, saw the end of the line now, just emerging from tourist class into business. 2 minutes, maybe 3. Turned to the gate agent at the mouth of the hatch, who was watching them closely. He must have sensed some sort of problem because he had unholstered his walkie-talkie and was holding it in his hand. Tell him I want custom agents up here, McDonald said quietly to the navigator. 3 or 4, armed, now. The navigator made his way through the line of passengers, excusing himself with an easy grin, and spoke quietly to the gate agent, raised his walkie-talkie to his mouth, and spoke quietly into it. McDonald, who had never put anything stronger than aspirin into his system in his entire life, and that only rarely turned to deer. What? McDonald, who had never put anything stronger than aspirin in his entire life, and that only rarely turned to deer. His lips were pressed into a thin white line like a scar. As soon as the last of the passengers are off, we're breaking that shithouse door open, he said. I don't care if customs here or not, do you understand? Roger, Deer said, and he watched the tail of the line make its way into the first class. Things are getting interesting. Very interesting. Well, hopefully you guys enjoyed that and catch the rest of the story in the next one. Take care.